Good morning. All right, well, today we're going to show you guys how to use a scroll saw. Scroll saw is one of my favorite machines because it's easy to use. And typically in woodworking, the narrower the blade, the curvier the cut we can make, and the wider the blade, the straighter the curve it can make. And as you can see from our scroll saw, it has a very small blade on it. And as a matter of fact, as far as scroll saw blades go, this is considered an extra large scroll saw blade. They get really, really small. So the first thing we're going to do before we start on scroll saw is make sure we have our safety glasses on. We've taken our watches off. There's no sleeves. Everything's pushed up. We're not going to get anything caught in the tool. The first thing I like to do is grab the front of this machine and run it one stroke by hand. That means lift up on it and push down on it. And by doing that, it simply does two things. When I push down on it, if you see the blade curve, it means we don't have enough blade tension, okay? And so we want to take care of that. Number two, when you push down on it or lift up on it, if you hear a clunking, that means a piece of wood has fallen through here and has gotten caught on the lower arm and is going to hit something. So before starting it, run it one stroke by hand to make sure the blade tension is correct and that all moving parts are clear. So the way this machine works, I'm going to start on slow. As you can see, it's just an up and down motion that allows us to cut the materials. This little hose here blows the sawdust out of our way so we can see what we're cutting. We can control the speed a couple different ways. One of them is we can turn the speed of the blade going up and down. We can also control the speed by how fast we're pushing the material into the blade. So what I'm going to do is come here and have a very thin, very soft piece of plywood, and I'm just going to hold on to this. And as you can see, this allows me to make a very, very, very tight cut. And the best part is, it makes really clean cuts. There's not a lot of tearing, there's a little bit on the back on this piece of plywood, but on a piece of solid wood, it really does a nice job of cutting things out. And as you see, pretty darn tight cuts, okay? A couple things we should talk about. Number one, the blade, when it's put in there, we put it so the teeth are pointing down because the scroll saw always cuts on the downstroke. So when the blade's going down and you can push it against the table is when it does its cutting. Occasionally, if you push this in here too aggressively and you're not holding on to it, you can get some chatter, okay? And so, which can be a little disturbing to you and frustrating. But in that case, if you're cutting something that starts to chatter a lot, we have a hold down foot that looks like this. And if you want to use a hold down foot, it bolts on, you take the blade out, and we bolt it onto this side of the machine, and it presses lightly on your workpiece, so it keeps your material against the table. What we find with these is they're so big and bulky that they tend to make it difficult to see where you're cutting and cut things that are very small. Okay, so we have these sitting by the scroll saws, and if you would like to use them, we simply install them. There's a little, on this side, there's a wing nut that they tuck underneath. It's not a very difficult process. Okay, so let me show you how to do what we call an inside cut. So this would be an outside cut. I came in from the outside edge of the board and made a cut. An inside cut is, let's suppose I wanted to cut a heart out. And I don't know why I always use a heart, but let's see, because I'm not much of an artist. But if I wanted to cut this heart out, you notice I've drilled a hole in the middle. So to do an internal cut, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to take the blade out, and then to do that, I'm going to turn the tension on the blade all the way down to 0. I'm going to loosen this wing nut, okay? And then when I lift up on the top of the machine, it gives me plenty of clearance to put this over the blade and through the hole. Now, when you lift this down, just don't drop it. Pull the blade forward a little bit, okay? Put the blade back in here, tighten that down a little bit, and then we're gonna crank this up. We find if you can crank it up to 3, 3.5, blade's pretty tight, okay? If you go tighter than that, you actually end up pulling the blade out of the holders when they're this big. So you'll be in pretty good shape. When you move the air hose, use both hands. Don't just grab it and yank it around and you'll break it off. Okay, so we got that where we want it. I'm gonna turn this on. And I have this machine set pretty close. That's the fastest it will go, which is crazy quick. And this is the slowest it can go. So I kind of feel like right here is good. We kind of dictate the speed or control the speed based on three things, okay? The thickness of the material, the slower you have to cut. The harder the material or the type of material, the slower you have to cut. And the third would be the tighter the radius. So when you're making a really tight turn, it helps to slow the saw down, okay? We want the blade cutting at the same speed you're feeding, ideally, okay? So I don't like it super fast. So I'm gonna turn that down just to right about there. And I'm gonna keep my hands at least a silver dollar's distance away, which is about like that, okay? So we don't want to get our hand in that blade. So I'm gonna come in here, follow my lines around. And again, I'm putting a little pressure downward so the board doesn't shatter. Although it does seem like it's kind of talking to me, huh? I'm going to come across here. And we go back up the same opening. Let that follow along there. Oh, that's not too good. So I can tell you, I'm trying to do this too quickly, and so it's hard to do it well when you're going too fast, okay? So now that I got my heart cut out, I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna open the blade up, lift that up, move this, pull my blade forward. I'm gonna put it back together for the next user in case he's doing an outside cut, and it makes a nice little cut, okay? When you're done, clean the scraps off, leave the machine how you found it, nice and neat. We'll go from there. Let me make sure we've covered everything. Let's see, we talked about the hold down should press lightly on the workpiece if you're using one. We talked about that. The scroll saw should cut on the downstroke. We talked about that. The rate at which stock gets fed depends on thickness, type material, and radius of cut. We talked about that. Before starting the scroll saw, one should push down on the upper assembly to rotate it by hand to make sure all moving parts are clear and blade tension is correct. We talked about that. We had a chat about the fact that we want to make sure we have safety glasses on, remove our jewelry, and that everything is set up the way it should be, okay? Last thing, if you break one of these blades, it's not a huge ordeal, but as you can see, here's a smaller blade that was broken. These little pieces can get sucked up by the dust collector. So if you break a blade, please turn off the saw, gather up all the pieces, bring them to me, and I'll trade the broken pieces for a new blade, okay? We want to make sure these get into a trash can and not sucked up the dust collector. That is our scroll saw that we're going to be using this year, and we'll be using the scroll saw in both 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. All right, have a great day. Bye.